Now I'm going to say this right off the bat. The BMW G310R, it's a very expensive motorcycle. Heck, I'd even call it overpriced. But it does make a pretty good first impression, and you can check out what we had to say about it on our first ride by clicking on the link right up there. Now though, we've got the bike with us for the last 1 week, and we have spent that time putting it through its paces, doing the daily grind and much more. So the question to answer now is, how does it tackle the real world? So first things first, is it fun to ride? And the short answer to that is yes, it is. Now we have discussed this before that this engine is shared with the TVS Apache RR 310, but there are some critical differences. Firstly, the BMW runs different size sprockets compared to the TVS, and then even the ECU is different and also running in a slightly different state of tune. But you get plenty of mid-range grunt. And even though this bike doesn't have ride-by-wire, open the throttle and you get instant response. It revs really fast and it builds up speed rather quickly as well. But then what is the actual performance like? Well, 34 PS and 28 Nm is far from the best in class. But then it is a fairly light bike at 158 kilos. But when you compare it to its nearest rival, the KTM 390 Duke, it's still about 3 kilos heavier and makes nearly 10 PS less. So in the run to 60 kph, the BMW is 0.3 seconds slower than the KTM, and up to 100 kph, it's 1.5 seconds slower. Heck, even the Apache RR 310 gets to both the 60 kph and 100 kph marks a little bit quicker than this BMW. But while the BMW is slower, 0 to 100 in 7.5 seconds is hardly what you might call slow. And then when you factor in the fantastic mid-range response, it does do well in ride-on acceleration in 3rd and 4th gear, which is amongst the best in class and even outdoing the KTM in some regard. Okay, forget straight line performance. What happens when you show it some twisties? Well, the G310R actually turns in quite quickly. In fact, the first time I turned the bike into a corner, it felt a bit unnerving. But you get used to it pretty quickly, as there's plenty of stability here thanks to that extra long swing arm. And when you factor in those high set foot pegs, you get plenty of cornering clearance on either side. The G310R can carry lots of lean angles with lots of confidence, and that's surprising considering these tires, this Michelin Pilot Street, are just about average. Honestly, the chassis does a very good job, and overall tossing the bike from one corner to the next is a lot of fun. If you replace these tires with something stickier, it's going to be outright mental. Now the brakes on offer here are excellent as well, though braking distances when compared to the Duke 390 are a little bit longer, both from 80 and 60 kph. That said, the G310 outbrakes pretty much everything else in its class, including the Ninja 300 ABS and even the Apache RR 310. But brake feel here, well, it's not that great, though amongst the 310 siblings, that is the TVS and the two BMWs, these brakes feel the best. To put it simply, out on the racetrack, of course the KTM 390 will be much quicker, but out in the real world, in real world twisties, the 310 won't be that far behind. That's because on real world roads with bumpy and uneven surfaces, the BMW suspension really shines. Now the ride quality here feels phenomenal, whether you're going over bad roads, potholes, speed breakers, or even mid-corner bumps. The BMW's suspension tune feels absolutely sophisticated, and it even makes something like the KTM 390 Duke, the new one, feel a little bit crude in that regard. And the fact that it has this kind of plush ride without compromising its handling ability is just mind-blowing. Now, if I'm being honest, you get the best ride quality with the rear suspension's preload set to the softest setting. You can bump it up a little bit to give you a little bit of extra stability through the corners, but I'd happily sacrifice that stability for that comfortable ride. But with the pillion on board, you have to bump it up no matter what, because then it does tend to bottom out over sharp bumps. Thankfully, it's very easy to do so with the tools provided. And speaking of pillions, the rear seat experience on the G310R isn't all that great. The seat itself, though decently padded, doesn't have too much space. The grab handle isn't too easy to hold, and overall, we'd only recommend it to slimmer pillions, that too for short distances. And it's not like the rider's seat is great either. Now don't get me wrong, it is comfortable, but that seat scoop is just so aggressive. And I agree, that's a bigger concern with fatter riders like me who tend to get locked in between the tank and that hump on the back seat. But even the normal size guys in our office were complaining that they simply couldn't move in the seat. And it gets worse for taller riders because the foot pegs are set so high that your lower body is in a very cramped position, which is kinda sad considering that your upper body is in a wonderful posture, just slightly aggressive yet comfortable. Now because of that cramped lower body position, spending long hours in the saddle is not very comfortable. But the biggest hindrance to doing long distance traveling on this G310R are the vibrations. Now the handlebars, they are rubber mounted, so they are quite isolated, but even after some long journey, your palms do start tingling just a little bit. But the bigger problem is at cruising speed, 100 kph in 6th gear, the bike doing about 6000 rpm, the tank is just buzzing. And then given how tight the seating area is, and you're hugging the tank with your legs, your private regions start to feel the buzz as well, which is fine in the privacy of your own bedroom, but out on the public road, not a good idea.
वाइब्रेटर किसको बुलाएंगे लोग?
Clearly, the G310R is not best suited for the highway. But then, what about the urban jungle? Well, actually, it fares much better here. Firstly, it feels quite light and nimble through traffic. Then, the low seat height means you can get your feet down very quickly. And the motor runs pretty cool. And it's a tractable motor, which means you can carry fairly high gears at fairly low speeds. But there is a distinct lack of bottom end torque, which means in bumper-to-bumper traffic, you kinda have to give it a lot of gas and slip the clutch quite a bit. Now here, we would have really appreciated a slipper clutch to make that clutch action lighter. Oh, and the headlight? That's kinda rubbish as well, because the low beam focuses just about 10 feet ahead of the bike. You pretty much have to be in high beam all the time. One area where the G310R excels is fuel efficiency. Thanks to the motor running unstressed at city speeds, it manages fairly high fuel efficiency in the urban environment, better than anything else in its class. But the motor starts to get a bit overwhelmed at higher speeds, and that causes a drop in highway mileage. Now, if I am being honest, I didn't expect to like this G310R so much, but it's actually quite a likable motorcycle. It handles really well, the motor has good performance, and that ride quality is just mind-blowing. And then just look at it. It's such a handsome machine, and it's put together really well. The best build quality in its class for sure. I mean, even the switchgear feels like it belongs on bigger Beemers. But there are some problems which are just a little difficult to overlook. Firstly, it does feel quite cramped for taller riders. And while it feels good in the city and excellent in the twisties, out on the highway, those vibes just hold you back from riding long distances. And then there's the lack of features. So that makes it fall behind its competition, and it doesn't feel as premium as a BMW should. But the biggest problem here is that all these issues would have been niggles if it was priced lower. And from what we hear, it's also quite expensive to run and maintain because service costs are typically BMW. As it stands, it's actually a wonderful bike whose price is just a little bit too hard to justify.